So what I wanted to do was sort of split the discussion into two parts, because they asked me if I would pop in and say something about blockchain, which, as you all know, is the future. So what I thought I would do, I don't just want to talk about tokens. I want to explain to you why I think the token stuff is interesting, and then I'll set about convincing you that it's worth time and trouble to look at the possibilities into that space. So first of all, I just want to make sure that you understand you have to listen to me, because I'm one of the top blockchain influencers in Europe. It's there in black and white. Well, it's in color, actually, but I didn't Photoshop that. That's real. So you have to, no, don't turn away. I'm one of the top influencers, so you have to listen to me about this sort of thing. And just to prove how influential I am, I'm more influential than Vitalik Buterin, who's the person who... This is not me saying this. This is independent polls are coming to this conclusion. So I just want to be very clear. So not only am I influential, I'm more important than the man who invented Ethereum. So there's no, you're getting this on a Thursday morning. You didn't think you'd be getting this level of information. So I'm just establishing my credentials with you before we move on. I stress again, it's not me that said this. This is independent third parties that say this sort of thing. It's probably the general public. I don't know. So where are we at the moment? Well, we have a slight problem in the blockchain space. And the problem is almost every potential application of the blockchain that I've seen over the last 5 years is almost completely stupid. And I go to a lot of conferences. You don't have to go to as many conferences that so I go to a lot of conferences. I see a lot of these things presented. I read a lot of these things in the newspapers. And the conversation usually goes along something like this. So I go to a conference, somebody says, well, we're going to solve, whatever it is, using the blockchain, right? It doesn't matter if we're going to solve the refugee crisis, we're going to get cats out of trees, we're going to make it easier to fight fires. I mean, whatever it is, it doesn't matter. And we're going to do it using the blockchain. And so then the conversation will go like, imagine this conversation. So I come along and say, what are you going to do? Well, we're going to, this is serious, this actually happens. We're working on a thing, we're going to help, and it's an important issue. We're going to help to deal with women who are being trafficked internationally, and we're going to fix it using the blockchain. I'm like, well, that's fantastic. That's a really important. And how exactly are you going to fix this with the blockchain? And so, well, when people get trafficked, the traffickers, they take away their identities, they take away their passports. So we're going to give these people a new identity on the blockchain, so wherever they go, they can show their identity. And that's fantastic. That's really... So you're going to make a list of vulnerable women and publish it on a public ledger that anybody can read. And it's, well, we haven't thought it all. And I'm like, can you mash this up with Google Maps? I mean, could I get a list of vulnerable women that are on my bus route home, for example? I mean, that would be a very useful... I'm deliberately saying this because I want to make the point. Some of these ideas are not only stupid, they're actually quite dangerous. And it's because the blockchain has become this kind of weird quasi-religious thing. Like, I see people go to it's the truth machine. Really? A consensus machine isn't a truth machine. The blockchain doesn't tell you what is true. It's not some sort of holy relic that we can turn to for enlightenment to help us through these difficult times. Here's another conversation that's very typical. We're going to use the blockchain to solve whatever it is, I don't know, the supply chain management or something like that. Well, it's me. That's fantastic. And I always say the same thing on Twitter, which is why I'm very annoying on Twitter. So when people put something about blockchain, I'm not going to take any notice of what you say unless you can tell me three things. What's in the blocks, how they're chained together, and who takes part in the consensus-forming process, right? Those are my three questions. They should be your first three questions when anyone presents the blockchain. So we're going to use the blockchain to fix this supply chain problem, whatever it is, right? So I say, okay, so what's in the blocks? Well, we don't actually have blocks as such. We have atomic records, monotomically increasing with a hash table to order them. Okay. Well, how are they chained together? Well, they're not actually in a chain, but we can tell from the separate hash tree that they're ordered correctly and the order hasn't been changed. Well, who takes part in the consensus-forming process? Well, there isn't really a consensus-forming process because we set the records. So there's no blocks and there's no chain, but it's a blockchain. No, well, it's inspired by the blockchain. It's inspired by the blockchain. That's what I actually said, yeah. It's not the blockchain, it's inspired by the blockchain. So almost all of the things you see presented as blockchain are actually really quite stupid when you think about it. And in particular, and the most stupid part of it, is when people insist on saying we're going to use it because we can use smart contracts. There's a lawyer sitting in the front row who will tell you, first, he'll tell you they're not contracts, and I'll tell you they're not smart, right? They're just apps. So I'm not going to call them smart contracts anymore. I'm just going to call them apps. They're apps that run on a blockchain. And people think up the most fantastical things about these smart contracts. Well, we're going to have a smart contract which will, whatever it's going to do, when the doorbell rings, it will tell Amazon to send the package. And I'm like, what are you talking about? You don't even understand what a smart contract, what an app is. They can't talk to anything. You can't have a smart contract that talks to Amazon. That's idiotic. You could have 10 million nodes in your blockchain. Well, you got 10 million nodes, and they're all going to send the same message to Amazon to open the door. That can't work. They only access things on the ledger. They can't access external things. So point one, and I know there are people in the audience who know more about this topic than I do, and I'm happy to see that they're agreeing with me out of the corner of my eye. Almost all of the things that you see about blockchain are completely stupid, and some of them are stupid and dangerous. So, given all of that, why are we even bothering to talk about blockchain today? Well, because if you can sweep away the nonsense, then you can start to think clearly about it. So here's my favorite example of nonsense, and I'm going to use that to put a line under all of this. I mean, it's my favorite example because I'm British, right? So you remember this a couple of years ago. There's this big fuss because it turned out there was horse meat in the burgers, right? Which I don't really care, but to some people it's a big deal, okay? I mean, I was happy to see there was meat in the burgers. That was fine. That's enough for me. I don't care whether it was a horse or not. But, but you take a real example of an actual supply chain failure. If you take a real example, and then you say to the blockchain guys, well, how exactly are you going to fix this? Don't just tell me waffle cloud thing. How exactly are you going to fix this? So, well, because the blockchain would be able to track that. It doesn't matter. We can already track it using paper. It doesn't make it. The person, he was Polish actually, the guy that put the horses in the mincing machine, whether you tell him to sign a piece of paper to say it was a cow, or whether he's going to type into the blockchain that it was a cow, doesn't make any difference. It's still a horse, right? The only difference is, once you've told the blockchain that it's a cow, it's immutable. That's what the blockchain people tell me. Once it's on the blockchain, it's immutable. So we've gone from what we used to call GIGO, garbage in, garbage out, to GIGO, garbage in, garbage that's immutable out. It's still garbage, but it's immutable garbage. I don't really think that's a step in the right direction. So let's stop for a moment and rethink what a blockchain is, and then we can decide what to do with it. So here's a couple of examples. So here's what a blockchain is, right? So for McKinsey, for example, every piece of information is mathematically encrypted and added to a new block. Is that true? You know what a blockchain is. No, it's not true, is it? They're wrong, because it's not encrypted. Nothing on the blockchain is encrypted. That's not how a blockchain works. So they've got a bit mixed up about this. But you can't really blame them, because here's the Financial Times. This comes from the Financial Times, how a blockchain works, and that's wrong too. Who's the first person in the audience who can tell me what's wrong in the Financial Times example? Come on. Guys, come on. Step two. Yeah, step two is wrong in that. It isn't. The transaction is represented online as a block. That's not what happens. The transactions are sent out, and then the miners mine the transactions into blocks, and then they're added. So, okay, so nobody knows what a blockchain is. Exactly, of course. So we're having an interesting discussion about something that nobody knows what it is. The ideas they've dreamt up for using it are completely fantastical, quasi-religious. I mean, this is very odd, don't you think? Because if you went to a conference about, I don't know, cloud, and somebody stood up and started talking bollocks about cloud, everybody in the audience would be like, wait, what? Call yourself a consultant and you'd be thrown off the stage. But when it's the blockchain, you can say any old bollocks and it's fine. People are happy with it. That's the blockchain. No, it wasn't. People talk more rubbish about the blockchain than any other subject in technology. I'm convinced of it. And it's because of its quasi-religious origins in Bitcoin. But anyway, the point is, I wouldn't be standing here talking about it unless I thought there was something we might actually do with it. So let's have a think from first principles about what a blockchain is. So here's my rudimentary model of a blockchain, okay? So a blockchain is divided into 4 layers: communications, consensus, content, and contract. I know it's not really a contract, but it begins with C, and I have experience in presenting to senior management. And if you want to present to senior management, you need to make everything begin with the same letter, so it's easy for them to remember. So it's the 4 Cs: communications, content, consensus, content, and contract. Now, one way of thinking about that, and my good friend Pascal Vouvier and Robert Sams were the first people to put this forward, you can think of those 4 layers as a new kind of computer that we didn't used to have before, which I'm going to label a consensus computer. We have this strange new kind of computer that runs on all of these different nodes all over the place, but comes to the same conclusions about state changes in the data. So I'm going to call that a consensus computer. We didn't have that before. That's genuinely new. And on that consensus computer, we run a special kind of application, which I call a consensus application. They're not smart contracts. They're consensus applications. So we have this new kind of computer, and on this new kind of computer, we can run these new kind of applications. And there's different applications we could run, but one of the applications we can run up there is what's become known as tokens. So one kind of application that we can run on there is a kind of application that manages the secure value, the secure transfer of different kinds of value on this higher level. Not the cryptocurrencies down below. We're using those to manage the security. But at a higher layer, we're moving these tokens around. And actually, for a variety of reasons, I think that's quite interesting. So people get tokens mixed up with ICOs, and obviously the ICO thing was completely crazy, and most of the people involved are going to go to jail, and everybody's going to lose their money. Well, yes, of course, that's true, right? But you shouldn't throw tokens out because ICOs were a bit wonky. Because when the token market gets regulated properly, which is soon, there's draft regulations in place already in Switzerland. FCA in the UK is very similar. I'm telling you, that token market is going to be huge. Now, broadly speaking, all of the regulators have this same kind of 3-way model. So the regulators are saying, well, okay, if you're going to mess around with these tokens, depending on what you're going to do with them, we're going to have 3 different kinds of tokens, 3 different regulatory constructs. We're going to have securities tokens, which will be the regulated ICOs, which I don't want to talk about today. We're going to have the utility tokens for access to resources, which I don't want to talk about today. And then we're going to have what people call money tokens or payment tokens. The FCA call them exchange tokens, which are a digital bearer instrument, which makes them like money. It doesn't make them money, but it makes them like money. So it means we can take digital assets and turn them into instruments that are a bit like money and use them a bit like money, which is great, because it means we don't have to use actual money as the intermediary. So how would we do that? Well, look at the cryptocurrency. Oh, my laser thing's not working. You see, at the cryptocurrency layer at the bottom, you're just talking about the secure transfer of value from one place to another, right? Like an ERC20 token or something like that. So you're saying, well, we've got some bits, right? And those bits belong to this wallet. That's all it says, okay? But we can make some institutional bindings that sit above that turn those things into real tradable assets. And they must be institutional bindings because you don't care what I say. So if I tell you 10101001, if I tell you, well, that's $1, you're like, whatever. That's what Dave says, who cares? But if Citibank tell you it's $1, Or more to the point, if somebody that you can sue tells you it's $1, that's different. Now you have a market. Similarly, we have an institutional binding on the other side because you have wallet AG35BC. If I tell you that wallet is me, can you send the money? Whatever. I could be any old crook, right? But if an institution, if Barclays tells you, well, that's Dave, great. Now we have a market. Now we have assets that are real assets, and we have a market that's a real market. And now all of a sudden we can trade tokens which mean things in the real world. And those tokens might be a US dollar, or it might be some gold, or it might be 1/1,000,000th of the Mona Lisa, or it might be a square meter of this building. It doesn't matter what it is. With the institutional binding in place, we've taken those assets and we've turned them into something liquid that can be traded like money. And the reason why people want to trade them like money is because then it means they can trade without clearing and settlement. And that's not because they have an institutional commitment to anarchy and they want us to live in a giant electronic Venezuela, but because they're money guys and it's cheaper. So you don't have to listen to me about this. This is Jonathan. Jonathan Larson runs corporate venturing for Ping An, the giant Chinese insurance company. This is us on stage at Money 2020 in Singapore last year. Yeah, I just wanted to tell you I was at Money 2020 in Singapore because that's my jet-setting lifestyle. So Jonathan said, when the token regulations are in place, we're going to tokenize everything. Well, because he's an anarchist and he wants to evade control? No, because it's cheaper. It makes for cheaper markets. This is Andreessen Horowitz last year, 1610. What they call it, they don't call it, they say application-specific currencies. That means tokens. They want to trade it too. The Winklevi twins, who are, you know, they're high priests in the Bitcoin religion. They want to set up a stablecoin, which is, of course, tokens. And last week, I mean, I don't want to add it on here, but last week you probably all saw the announcement from JP Morgan about JPM coin. And everyone's like, what are they doing? Why are they making JPM? It's a token. It's the same thing. If you have a token which is institutionally linked to a real asset in the real world, then that token becomes a kind of money and you operate in a cheaper market. So, in conclusion, yes, almost everything you see about the blockchain is completely stupid. Yes, lots of people involved in it are criminals and are all going to jail. Yes, lots of people, yeah, whatever. But there is a new technology at the core of it, and that new technology is going to deliver a new kind of market, a crypto market, which is a cheaper market to trade assets, and that's why it will grow, that's why it will drain liquidity from existing markets. Within organizations, that same technology will be used to construct enterprise shared ledger applications, which simply reduce the cost of managing transactions inside corporate boundaries and between corporate boundaries in consortium structures. And that ledger will enable us to do some things with tokens which you just cannot do in the real world. Things that are impossible to imagine. So I could compute that, so you could put your assets and liabilities in front of me in the form of tokens, which actually could be encrypted, not like the McKinsey thing earlier on. And I could compute that your assets exceed your liabilities, in other words, that you're solvent, without actually being able to read what any of those things are using homomorphic encryption. So not only do you have this new kind of market, it's a market that can do counterintuitive things that you can't do in existing markets. So yes, the blockchain is stupid, but yes, it's going to be huge. Thanks very much for listening.